Morning everybody, this is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. I want to do I want to do another lecture on two more books of the New Testament. They're going to be the letter of Paul to Titus and the letter of Paul to Philemon. Now, the letter of Paul to Titus is a beautiful little book. It's one of my favourite little books. You say, why do you have favourites, Stephen? Well, because there's something about this letter that's very, very practical. Something that's very beneficial for the Christian to listen to. It's just 3 chapters, as I say. I call this book, this little letter, Living for God. It's not about theory alone, it's about practicalities. And Paul writes to Titus to give him advice regarding helping the churches of Crete. Paul is writing in about 64 to 67 AD. It's difficult to know an exact time. And the churches in Crete were growing, and some of the maturing Christians needed to be recognized as leaders that God has made them. And Paul writes to tell Titus how to do it. We see this in 1 Timothy. Titus was more bold than Timothy. Timothy was a Gentile, circumcised by Paul, but Titus was a Jew. Okay, sorry, I got that wrong. Timothy was not a Gentile circumcised by Paul. He was a Jew, but he hadn't been circumcised, if you see what I mean. Titus was a Jew, and there was no question about his circumcision. You know, many boast that they're members of the New Testament church, but a few really existed in those times. And the ideal church is one where strong leadership is found. I don't mean strong in being domineering and boisterous. I mean strong in terms of sound teaching and a spirit of love and a faithful witness for Christ. And so there's 2 main themes in the letter of Paul to Titus. We have leadership in the church, and we have living for God in the church and in society. So let me just give you a very brief overview of the book. Chapter 1, really, we begin with greetings and blessings, and then we dive immediately into church leadership. And the first issue is the question of what it is to be an elder. That's chapter 1. Now in chapter 2, we have main exhortations to Titus to be teaching the word of God. And then lastly, in chapter 3, we have the influence that a godly church can have in the society in which it is found. And then at the end, we have farewell and personal messages. Now let's have a look at the little book called Philemon. Now, Philemon is it's a letter written by Paul. It has only 1 chapter and it's only 25 verses. And I call this little letter, Take Your Brother Back. Now, Paul writes to Philemon to ask him to take back a slave who would run away from him. Onesimus, that's the slave, had met Paul and he had become a Christian. And Paul does not condemn slavery, but he calls Onesimus his brother. He's now a Christian. And Paul writes probably in about 60 to 62 AD. There were about 60,000 slaves in the Roman Empire out of a population of about 120,000 in Rome. A slave was a chattel, worked for no pay, and they had no opportunity to collect a vast amount of wealth. They were slaves, and they were given food and they were given accommodation, and that was it. So they worked for nothing. Paul does not oppose the culture of his day in this regard, but what he does, he has a simple little wordplay. He says, look, in chapter 1, in verse 1, verse 10, in verse 1, I'm getting all this wrong. In verse 10 and 11, he says, I beseech thee for my son Onesimus, my son Onesimus. The word means profitable. He says, whom I have begotten in my bonds, which in time past to thee was unprofitable, but now is profitable to you and to me. So he has this little play on words, and he says, look, Onesimus was unprofitable or un-Onesimus, but now he is Onesimus to you and to me. So we have, first of all, Paul's appreciation for his friend Philemon, and then we have Paul's appeal for kindness towards Onesimus. So we have the first part, which is greetings from Paul and Timothy and thanksgiving to God. And then we have from verse 8 to 22 his request regarding Onesimus. This is a personal plea. He says, listen, if he owes you anything, I will pay all his debts because I love him in the Lord and I want him to come back to you. And that's exactly what Paul does. So what wonderful letters we have in the New Testament. Next time we're going to be looking at the letter of probably Paul to the Hebrews. Looking forward to that. So have a great day and we'll catch up with you next time. Bye for now.